Yeah. And so all these freeze moments, that's exactly what happens when we get traumatized. We freeze because we cannot flight and we cannot flee away and we cannot fight. And that's why, especially with children who grow up with alcohol, I think it's so relevant because you are a child. You cannot run away. You cannot fight because it's your parents, or not all the time at least. So you have to freeze, or you do freeze. And when we freeze, they say we fragment. So that means we separate things in our brain, right?
Welcome to the Becoming Sound podcast, where we dive into the tough stuff and try to find the humor in the hot mess of being an adult child. Join me as we peel back the layers on growing up in dysfunction, navigating substance abuse, mental health challenges, and everything in between. Hello. Today my guest is Kristien Geurts. She has a master's in clinical psychology, and she runs a therapy practice in Brussels, Belgium. She is practicing relationship, family, and trauma therapy, specifically using EMDR techniques, which she is going to educate us on today. So let's get started. Welcome, Kristien. Thanks for joining me all the way from Belgium. How are you?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me all the way from Belgium. I'm excited. I'm happy to participate in your podcast. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So tell me a little bit about your family dynamics and growing up, and when you kind of became aware that there was dysfunction or things weren't, quote, normal.
Okay. So I grew up in Belgium, obviously, as the oldest of 3 children in a family that from an outside view did perfectly well. My dad was a successful businessman. My mom was a teacher. And we had family around. Basically, things started to get difficult when I started to get in puberty. My mom's and dad's marriage, when I look back at it, was really starting to get in trouble back then. And my mom started drinking. But I don't know exactly how it is in the US, but in Belgium, drinking is really quite normal. It's something you do when you go out on a terrace or even family dinners. So I wasn't asking too many questions. It was like a family habit. There was always wine, there was always beer. But then at a certain point, my mom was really behaving strangely. She was talking about suicide. She was running away from the home evenings, and I was very worried, of course. My dad wasn't. And my brother and sister were also too little to really be involved. So it was tough on me back then. And it was actually something I didn't really know how to talk about with anybody, even in my family. Like my grandparents, there was so much pressure to expose the image of the normal, healthy, well-functioning family. And I felt this pressure without even realizing it. So what happened then is that at a certain point, the conflicts between me and my mom, they got really high. I started acting out. I started dating boys that were way too old, drinking myself a lot, using all kinds of drugs. I was only 14, 15. I snuck out of the window. My parents knew and they never really stopped me, which is strange in hindsight. But also okay. But then I realized at a certain point, because I was always quite good at school, that was my luck. So I realized at a certain point that it was becoming too strange. I was estranging from my other kids in my class. So I decided to go to a boarding school by myself, which is what I did. And that way I started to have some distance. I got to know different friends, different families, but it took me way longer to realize just how dysfunctional we were. And sadly, it's getting worse in my family. So it never got really better. So it's I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Do you feel like being the oldest child? Because I'm the oldest of 3 as well, and so I think we take on a lot of that responsibility role. You know, we just feel responsible for everyone. You feel like you got to keep all this stuff together. Is that kind of the path that you took as well?
It is, yeah. I think it's got to do with being the oldest. It was also in a way because things seemed to go really well for me. I was like the easy child, the lucky child. Everything went well at school. I had friends. I was sporty. Like from the outside world, I was like a golden girl in a way. I was also very verbal, so I don't think anybody noticed. I don't think my parents really noticed that I was struggling on the inside. I
Hmm.
don't think they did.
Were you that way at home too? Like the same kind of at school? Were you behaving the same way at home as well, or?
At home, I was caring a lot already. In hindsight, again, I was talking with my mom a lot. I kept a diary since I was 7, and I read it back a few years ago. And already at the age of 8, I write something like, "I'm really worried. My mom isn't happy with my dad, and I should help her." You know, I think
Mm,
I was really very busy with all that, and then also trying to take care of my brother and my sister a little bit.
hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I think I
So
took
like
this role.
caretaker
Yeah,
role, right? Yeah, for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you kind of grow up a lot faster than you should,
Yes,
when you're in
yes,
that. It's like you parentified kind of thing, right?
yeah,
You go into
I
the
do.
parent role. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, when you moved into adulthood, when did you start realizing that your childhood dysfunction, like your family, had a big impact on you? Like, when did it start affecting you as an adult?
I think I started realizing it gradually because parents of friends would tell me that there was something wrong with my mom. But I was very shy talking about it with people, so I think I always toned it down. Um, their problems only got really bad when I was already a mom myself. So, like
Mm,
10, 15 years, it started to get really bad. But when I really realized, I think it really became gradually. I was thinking about the question before. I don't think I have like the biggest insight for me was when I became a mother myself.
mm-hmm.
And I really, really missed the care that I had been missing for such a long time. But then it really hit me hard. Like, even
Mm-hmm.
then, that was for me the hardest moment
Yeah.
where I fully felt like, oh my god, this has been so painful for such a long time.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of people, after speaking with a lot of people, the same kind of thing comes up, especially for
Yeah.
women. We become mothers, and all of a sudden, it's like the trauma or the pain or all those emotions, they just flood back to you. So you're either repeating the same patterns from your childhood, or
Hmm.
you're all of a sudden faced with things that you were missing and you didn't even know it until
Yeah.
this little child shows up, and yeah, it kind of hits you.
Yeah. And like many moms do, I reacted by trying to be the perfect mom, by trying to be very loving, very caring. But I was so uptight about everything, so afraid to do things wrong that I ended up feeling really tired, depressed. I had some anxiety. I kept functioning all the time, but it was like the level below it was quite high for a very long time. I think it's only since maybe 8 or 10, yeah, maybe 8 years that I started to feel really better. So, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a
yeah,
common like overwhelm, burnout, and you don't know
yeah,
where that's coming from, right?
yeah.
Yeah. How do
Yeah.
people start to identify that that could be childhood trauma that they're dealing with when they feel in that state?
Well, it's so important that you try to express to people that it's not just normal fatigue with baby, for example, or a normal burnout feeling with work. It's hard, but you feel it in a way. I think you always realize you have memories coming back from your family, or you feel very upset when you're in touch with them. So in a way, I think you do realize like it might be linked to your family, but it's so important that people talk about it with people they trust, so they start understanding the scale, because it's not because it's past and because you're safe that it's not still very present in your life at that moment, right? So but that's
Yeah.
something that's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, but people who are in this position, I think they might know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I, I know what you mean for sure. I just remember back being in that situation, I wasn't aware that, I mean, there was so much dysfunction, and I had just kind of slipped into roles where I was trying to push everything down and just ignore it, and trying to be like, my perfectionism was out of control.
Yeah.
And so I was just covering it up was a full-time job. You know, covering up the mess inside me was a full-time job. And I know we didn't have the resources back then, you know, that we do now. And I think it's just it's so important for anyone, but women especially, to reach out and to talk to someone, because you know, you're at home by yourself usually with the kids at some point, especially when they're little. Or if you're a working mother, that can be compounded. You know, you've got like work stress and then home stress. I don't even know how you deal with that, but I think it's really hard to recognize and to get people to want to take that next step and talk to someone, right?
Yeah. And as you also already explained in the previous episodes of your podcast, Krista, I think the shame is also one of the most difficult burdens, like the most difficult rock to cross. Like, how do you talk about this with people? You feel like a failure already, and then exposing this, it might be very scary for people.
Yeah. And I mean, you're not alone. People out there suffering from this is far from it. I think it's more the norm that we're all going through something, right?
I think so too.
I mean, and yet we all remain silent, and nobody gets help, and it perpetuates until you feel like it's so built up and so overwhelming you really can't handle it. It's almost like having a mental break, you know, at some point.
It is, at some it is, or a physical break, like you sort of get really unwell or sick all the time. Your body often gives signals that you're not okay, and can also be muscle tenseness. It doesn't always have to be real sickness, but there's so many signs that you can feel. Like you said, the perfectionism, trying to keep control and feeling like it's not working, that's often a sign that most of the time, something older or deeper is at stake.
What are some of the other signs and symptoms that people could look for, other than perfectionism kind of thing? But there are a lot of traits out there that you could be experiencing. What are some of those?
I think the perfectionism is a big one, but I think also this taking up the carer role. So people who care a lot about people all the time, who have a tendency to put other people first. And it's not just about pleasing, because there's a lot of talk about being less of a pleaser, but it's more than that. It's people who always put other people first in their mind. Like, they will go for a meal and always see what the other ones are having, or they will plan on a trip and they will always see what the other ones are doing. And they're doing this because they think it's a nice thing to do, but nobody should always put other people first. It's not healthy and it's not durable in a way. So I think that putting other people first always. And then maybe I think a lot of people do have some kind of excess that they have, like, even if they're not addicts themselves, like in drinking, maybe there's like food that you sometimes really indulge in to a point that you don't feel comfortable. Or shopping, I think, is very common, like, especially nowadays, it's so easy, it's click and you have so much stuff. Or going out or dating, like in a way that isn't feeling good anymore. Like, all these things help us feel good for a little while, but they don't really resolve the emptiness or the pain that you're feeling down deep. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, people who grow up, adult children who grow up in homes where there's alcoholism or addiction, dysfunction, that type of thing, narcissism, all the whole spectrum of it. A lot of kids actually grow up becoming addicted to substances.
Yes.
But there are a lot of us who are addicted to other things, like you said. I would have never recognized or admitted that I had that in me, you know, that my personality was very addictive. Food, shopping, you know, and it's like you're filling the hole. It's like you're trying to fill the hole with things, and it just doesn't work. And so you just keep going and going, you know. So that addictive behavior is very, very common.
Yeah.
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 So what was the catalyst for you in getting into what you do? I just want you to tell people what it is you do and how you come to doing that.
Yes. So before I became a psychologist, I was working as a communication manager in businesses, and then I got pregnant with my second son, and at the same time, my father got a very serious disease. And I don't have a good relationship with my father, but nevertheless, it was, of course, a blow. So I was sitting in the hospital ward, like waiting, and I could see the psychologist's nameplates hanging there. And it was something I had been wanting to do for a long time, but I thought I wasn't capable of doing it. So I had chosen a different profession. But then at that point, also, I was just a new mother of my first son. I became pregnant fast of the second one. So I was pregnant. My father we thought he was dying. And I sat there and I was like, it's now or never. I felt like my life was changing anyway. I had to really find how I lived with my job, with the children, like inventing myself as a mother, and then also in my career. And I really felt like I want to do something where I can add value, because I thought I could do it. I thought I had it in me to understand how people felt and help them. So I decided to go back to school and go study psychology and a therapist's training to become a therapist. That's what I did.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think some of the best therapists and are people who understand. I mean, if you've been through it, it gives you a different level of understanding, you know. And I mean, whenever friends come to me, or I always say, you need help with this and this, I would seek out a professional who specifically deals with this. And if you get to know someone, or just ask them, people who've been through something really have a different level of understanding, I think, and that's really important too.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's important for people, especially if you have been through so much, like this complex way of growing up, or complex PTSD, as we might talk about later. Especially if you've been through so much, it's so important that you feel that the person across is not just cold clinician who is diagnosing you, but it is somebody who wants to understand you and really feel how you feel. And that goes a lot better if you've also felt those depths. And yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, for sure. So you kind of specialize in relationship, family, and trauma therapy. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, I first started specializing in family therapy and relationships, so that's something I still do. But I noticed after a little while that there are also things that are hard to resolve with words. So I heard about the EMDR trauma therapy, like you guys also hear about it probably. And I thought I might as well try it. So I took the training. I also underwent it for myself a couple of times with the therapist I was working with back then. And I found it amazing what it did, how it can help people. So what I do now is I still work in a very relational way. I also work with couples and families. But if I feel we touch upon a topic that people really know, they understand what should change, but their whole being is in resistance, then I know that EMDR therapy might be a good way of addressing it, because it's all about something very deep. It's not in your awareness that it happens. It's much deeper.
Yeah. And what is the acronym EMDR? What is it? And can you explain it a little bit more?
Of course. The acronym is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. And that's a difficult term to actually say, that in this technique, you're gonna help your brain process a memory that has been too hard to process up until now. So the desensitization is actually helping somebody really stay with a certain memory, help them with that, so they don't get as sensitive anymore to all the triggers linked to it, the sounds, the feelings, the emotions, so that they don't get triggered in their daily life so much anymore, right?
Right, and they're able to process what comes up a
Yes.
little easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, I can see sometimes talk therapy is tough, right? Because then you start talking about something and instantly you're triggered. By your own feelings and emotions that come up with it, and it's just it's a kind of a response to shut down, right?
Yeah, it's a shutdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all these freeze moments. That's exactly what happens when we get traumatized. We freeze because we cannot flight and we cannot flee away and we cannot fight. And that's why, especially with children who grow up with alcohol, I think it's so relevant, because you are a child. You cannot run away. You cannot fight because it's your parents, or not all the time at least. So you have to freeze, or you do freeze. And when we freeze, they say we fragment. So that means we separate things in our brain, right? We store, and you could really see it on a scan. We store things separately instead of bringing it together and processing it.
And this must be why when we say we lose our identities, it's like we're compartmentalizing that, right?
Yes.
Like, I mean, you reach a certain stage, I felt like for myself, and you all of a sudden you're like, I don't even know who I am. You know, that common phrase is, I don't even know who I am anymore. And for someone who grew up with that, I think that went away quite a long time ago. When you're a kid, you put who you are aside because you've got all these other roles to fill.
Yeah, right? You're not busy with that. And nobody asks you, or often not a lot of people ask you, like, what do you really want? What are you interested in? What is yours? So,
exactly. Yeah, you really lose that. I mean, your parents don't have the capacity or time or energy to even address those things. I mean, they're too busy keeping their own heads above water, barely, surviving, and there's not a lot of thriving that goes on in homes. Like
there isn't, and that's why as a child you build up all these ideas about yourself, but mainly the very difficult idea is that you are not worth all this attention either, or you're not worth all these questions or these searchings. And that's something that you can then address. Like, the self-worth is basically where we have to start building up again. So and I'm just gonna add, because you asked about the acronym, so the eye movement. Well, the eye movement is the most well-known technique. So you have people watching your fingers, or that you can use light bulbs, but actually it doesn't have to be the eyes. What is important is that we stimulate both brain halves fast, one after the other. So, for example, I do a lot of ticking on people's knees, or you could even do it by yourself by tapping on your shoulder. So what is important is that both brain halves are stimulated.
Right.
Because they don't know why, but because apparently our brain is more able to process difficult memories when that happens. They don't have the scientific explanation of the why, but they know it does work, right?
Interesting. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's good for the awareness of it too, because so many people, when they're feeling really stuck or they don't know what to do, is the last thing they want to do is talk about their crap. It becomes a reason to bottle it up even more. So if they know there's a different type of therapy that you don't have to talk a lot, or it might just be this kind of therapy to bring that up, right? To help process some things and get those triggers to lessen.
What is important though, Krista, I would like to add that this is a form of therapy, basically like all trauma therapy. You can only really apply trauma therapy or start therapy when the trauma is over. That means if you're still in the middle of the situation, that it's not wise to start addressing that actual problem. First, there is a long phase, of stabilization, where a person needs to have a house, a job, like the basic things in life that give you a foundation to build a life on, that needs to be settled first. I mean, you don't really need to have a job, but like some stability. And from that level, then you can start looking back and addressing trauma. But you cannot address trauma in the middle of the trauma, if you understand what I mean.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, there's different ways of addressing that.
Yes.
If you are in the middle of trauma, that's a different process and different, different help to seek for sure. Yeah, and understandable. I think that's why a lot of adult children of dysfunction alcoholics really don't start their own healing until they're probably in their 30s and 40s. And some people even later. It's crazy to think of, I mean, I started in my 40s for sure. I was just entering into my 40s when I started realizing I really needed to address and look at what was happening. Yeah. But it wasn't until my son actually went through his own, battle with addiction that I really realized there were a lot of missing pieces to my healing and to my what I needed to do. And I think it's just different circumstances bring different things up in you, right? So there's different levels at all ages.
I think there are, and I think it's also a continuous progress. I don't consider myself healed entirely or anything of the kind. I feel like that's also why I went and listened to your podcast, because something had come up and I was looking for a new source of way of looking at the topic. And that's so nice that you keep informing yourself and looking for different kinds of help. I think that's important.
Yeah, it's so important. And same with me too. I think it's just a lifelong place that we're in, and this journey that we're on, and healing and discovering more about ourselves. We're always in a state of change anyway, so it's I love listening to people and hearing different things about healing. It always gives me something too, so I don't do this just to inform my audience. You're really important, audience. But it's part of it's for me too. I heal when I listen to other people, and I know that's why I do this, is because I know there's people out there who are just listening, and they just need to hear something that resonates with them. So it's so important to put yourself out there and get some help. So does EMDR work for other types of conditions too? Like not just trauma, but what other things would it work well for?
It works for anxiety, for depression, for negative self-image. It works for many things. It started out back in the 70s, I think, really as a trauma therapy, like for veterans or people who went through very clear trauma. But gradually they understood, no, it can work for many things. It's all about stuff that you have experienced that you think you got over, but deep inside you're still carrying a belief that you learned in that moment. I'm powerless, I'm helpless, I'm not strong enough, I'm weak, I whatever. It can be all these kinds of things that you feel about yourself, and it's that we need to address. So yes, it can be used for many different situations.
Agreed. So I did want to talk a little bit about complex PTSD, because it is quite different than PTSD, right? Just explain a little bit about what the difference is.
Well, the main difference is with complex PTSD is that it happened over a very long time, and that it consists of very many different memories, right? And very many different things that happen. So it's usually something that involved several relations in your life that went over for years of time. So that is the complexity. It's not just a simple PTSD, if you would say, it's maybe a bit disrespectful, but a simple PTSD would be somebody who, let's say, survived a terrorist attack. Not that it's simple at all, but I mean something very clear that happens once, that is a short moment, and then you can work with that. But growing,
like a car accident, or
for example, that's major. A better.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
but anything. I mean, it's very. Honestly, it's very possible in our society today. Terrorist attacks, right, happen a lot. Yeah. There's also, school shootings and stuff like that are one-time things that are produce a huge PTSD, but complex is, it's growing up with this stuff. It's little traumas
Yes.
that happen to you daily, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
yeah,
It's
that
really
makes
that. It's
sense.
people growing up in, for example, in neighborhoods where there's violence all the time, where
Mm-hmm.
they're getting used to it. So they think they are used to it. So they think they are not traumatized, but they are, because their safety has been at risk all the time. So it
Mm-hmm.
goes a bit lower. It's less present in your awareness, but it's very, because it takes so long and because it comes from so many corners, it's very, it's in your core in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. I mean, up until a few years ago, I would have never considered myself traumatized either. And
No.
when I started peeling back the layers of that, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. That a lot of little traumas happened. I thought I was so good at handling it,
Yes.
at, like I am exceptionally well in a crisis situation. Like if there's
Of
an
course you are.
emergency, I'm like your girl. Like
Yeah, yeah.
you definitely want me there in a crisis because I'm good at like managing all the different, faculties that come up.
Yes.
And I realized that's what I was doing my whole childhood, was all
Yes.
these traumas that were coming up and all of the chaos in our family. And yes, there was loving times, and I felt loved, but my dad had big issues, and he was kind of a rager sometimes, and so those traumas would come in bits and pieces, but you never knew when it was going to happen. So I just became a master at controlling the situation. And if I
Yeah.
couldn't control the situation, I could at least control my
Yeah.
response to it. And so I think that's why I just, for so long, didn't realize that I actually had trauma. Yeah, it would have,
No.
nothing big happened. I don't remember anything big happening. So,
Well, of course, one really big thing happened, right? Like having a parent that is unpredictable and even
mhm.
sometimes aggressive is an enormous thing, but it happens, sadly, it happens so often that so many people don't really even consider it as a big thing anymore. Like you get used to it, it's your reality, but no, it gives your emotional safety
Yeah,
isn't there, right? Basically,
yeah,
so you learn
yeah,
coping mechanisms. You do, right?
yeah,
So
yeah, for sure. Um, So, can you give a little bit of advice or maybe some steps to take if there's someone out there listening who is starting to become aware? Because I think awareness is key. If you're really not aware of your situation and maybe
yeah,
you stumble across something and you're listening and it sparks something in you, or
yeah.
you are becoming aware and you feel really stuck, what are some steps people can take to get to the point where they can reach out?
Yeah, I think there's three things that could work. In the best case, you can do all three of them, but if it's too scary, you can do just one of them. I think one is what you're doing right now, like listening to information, getting curious about it, reading, Googling, just watching films. It doesn't matter, everything around the theme, to inform yourself. So that's one thing. A second thing, of course, is reaching out to other people. And even if you don't really want to share your story, you can try to express a bit more how you're feeling, that you're actually kind of tired, you're actually kind of low. Like reach out a little bit to help people see you're struggling. And in the best case, maybe to a therapist, but just start with a friend or a neighbor. That's the second. And the third one, which might seem maybe a bit strange, is but to have your body really well taken care of. Like
Mm-hmm.
go to get a massage, start to go to bed a bit earlier, try to eat good food. Like really start treating yourself as a very important living creature. And this will also help you to find the courage to do the other steps. But it's so important because it's a signal that you are important if you start taking
Mm-hmm.
care of your body a bit more.
Yeah, yeah, that's so important. I think as we were talking before about even as mothers too,
Yeah.
and I did this, and I know people in my life that your kids become your world, and you're
Yeah.
so wrapped up in taking care of them that it feels selfish or shameful or guilt.
Yeah.
You feel guilty for even taking time out for yourself when you
Yes.
you feel you need it, but you think, how's everyone gonna perceive me? Like, what are they gonna think if I'm not at every sporting event, at every this, at every that, and my kids aren't in 10 things, and like, it just becomes this craziness that you live in.
It becomes a craziness, and it's also a lot about not having to stand still, right? Because once you start standing still, you start to feel, and sometimes this feeling is painful. So if you know that if somebody is listening and they recognize themselves in that, it might be a good idea to try and get that break, and at least get them to something simple for yourself to start to feel, like in little steps. You can start by doing something every once in a month or in a week, or see whatever works for you. Take your time, because it's going to take a while in the end.
Yeah, I had a thought come through my head when you say the busyness. That's a huge part. I've always been one of those people. I remember, you'd have friends over, you have a little party or whatever, and here's Krista cleaning, and the guests aren't even gone yet. Like, don't sit down at the table and enjoy the conversation and enjoy your guests. I would just be constantly doing stuff. And then I would do it without, it's like autopilot, and I'd be cleaning and making sure everything's, and either my husband at the time or, a friend would be like, why don't you just sit down? It's like, oh, no, I'm good, right? I'm good. I'm just tidying up a bit. Like, I can't. And I have people in my life that do this all the time.
There's a lot of people doing that. Yes, it's true. But it's because
you just don't know how to enjoy just being still and being in the moment, right? Yeah.
And also, maybe, Krista, sometimes you might be overstimulated by all the company or by everything that is, because you've been trying to be such a good host, or you've been trying to be such a good friend. So you're a little bit overstimulated. And when you would really calm down, you might sometimes feel that you need to put a boundary towards people, or say, like, I'm tired, or I need a break. And that is scary, because you're not used to expressing your own needs. Like, so it's a very difficult process to stop being so busy.
No kidding. It's so true. It's so true. Oh my goodness. When I look back now, I'm like, wow. It's like a big eye opener, right? Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's an old habit, and it's also okay if it happens every once in a while. It's not like you have to become this super chill person. I think you will always probably, like all of us, like, will always be the first one or the second one, at least in an emergency, to help, or to, if somebody is feeling low, to listen. That's okay. That's also a nice quality to develop. It just needs to be outbalanced a little bit more.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's for sure about balance, finding balance for yourself, and not giving a label to it too. Is don't put yourself in a box, or it's I can be all of these things and still be healing in certain ways, and still be adopting different programming and and different characteristics for myself. So that's really important. I'm glad we talked about that. So do you offer any online services or anything, or you just have your practice in Belgium?
I have my practice in Belgium, in which I do work with people online sometimes, also from other countries. Okay. But I don't know how it is in the US, but in Belgium there are too few psychologists for the population, so it's not, I cannot help people in a short term. But yes, online services. You can also do EMDR online. You can. Okay. But I think it feels more comfortable when you're in a room with somebody to really have a person. For sure.
Yeah. But if someone wanted to reach out to you just to, for some talk therapy, or just to learn more about it, just to feel comfortable, that's available. That's good. Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
So, that's awesome information. I want to ask you one last question before we wrap up. Can you tell my audience maybe one piece of advice you would give your 20-year-old self?
I think I would say, like, chill. Stop trying to do everything so well at the same time, and relax a bit more. Enjoy your time with friends. This is like such an important part of your life where you are not so responsible, actually. So enjoy it. Take time to see what you feel, and it's okay if you're not feeling enthusiastic or good-natured all the time. It's fine to just chill, take a break, like go on a holiday. That's really what I would say. Like, just take some time. Take some time. Nothing is burning. You don't have to rush through life like you are doing when you're 20. Right?
Yeah, that's great advice. I think we think we're supposed to achieve all this stuff so fast, and we're just on this. You jump so quickly on the hamster wheel. You don't realize you have your whole life to ride the hamster wheel if you want. But
and that it moves it anyway, it's not like it's gonna stop moving. So
yeah, exactly. No, that's great advice. That's great advice.
That's true.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Kristien. I have enjoyed having you on.
Me too.
And I look forward to doing this again sometime.
Yes, well, you know me now, and you know where to find me, so I would love to.
That's right.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to.
Oh, you're so welcome. My pleasure. And I will post a way that people can connect with you in the show notes, and
that's okay.
And so they can maybe get in touch with you. So thank you.
Very
so much.
welcome. Thank you, and have a lovely day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today on another episode of Becoming Sound. If this episode resonated with you in some way, please share it with someone you care about. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It helps to get this information out to more people who may need it. If you have a sec, I would love a follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, hit the 5-star rating and give me a review. When you're scrolling, follow me on my social platforms, and I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Have a fabulous day, lots of love and gratitude from me. Please note, the views, information, and opinions expressed during the Becoming Sound podcast series are solely those of the individuals involved. The content of this podcast is to educate, inform, and for entertainment purposes only. This podcast series and the content presented does not constitute for medical or other professional advice or services. If you are in crisis or in need of help, please contact your medical or professional provider.